I'm Michael Norris, and my work Sygyt is a finalist in the SOUNZ Contemporary Award 2018. So I've long been interested in other vocal styles from around the world, particularly Mongolian throat singing, which is something I think I first heard when I was about 18 or 19 and was blown away by how someone could get that amazing sound. And I was sort of mystified by it, but it kept cropping up every year or so, particularly hanging around Jack Body. There was always lots of throat singing being talked about. And in fact, later on, after I had graduated from university and been away overseas and come back, I discovered a young man who was a student here at Victoria University who was able to do some throat singing himself, and that was Jonny Marks. And we kept in touch, and I was very much in awe of what he could do with his voice. And then he went overseas, in fact, to Mongolia to study throat singing with actual Mongolian throat singers. And when he came back to New Zealand, I again was even more impressed by how much his throat singing had improved, and just how much of a sort of consummate musician he was. And I thought to myself, one day I've got to work and collaborate with him. So when I first had the idea about collaborating with Jonny, it was because I'd been interested in this compositional technique known as spectralism for a while, which is a kind of approach to composition that first started in about the mid-1970s in France. And a number of composers such as Gérard Grézet, Kaya Sarioho, Tristan Murail were interested in the acoustic properties of sound and representing that in some way in a compositional form. So, for example, they would calculate the harmonic series of a cello or a trombone and then orchestrate those frequencies for the ensemble and manipulate it in various ways. And I became quite interested in this too, and had sort of wondered why, as far as I knew, no one had ever done any spectral works with a throat singer, given that they're singing harmonics of the vocal spectrum. It seemed like an obvious idea, but no one, as far as I know, had done it. Later I discovered that there were one or two people who had actually done it, but I decided that this was something I was going to do. So when I was programming a concert for Stroma called Spectral Electric, I said to Jonny, would you like to collaborate on a piece to go into that concert? He was very keen. So we met, and I found out more about his capabilities, what range he had, what notes he could hold. I did some recordings of him, tried different variations in vocal techniques. Throat singing has a number of different styles. There's the high style Sygyt, which is a high whistling kind of sound, but there's also the lower version of that where you sing much deeper down in your throat. And that's Kagira, or however it's pronounced. I can't quite pronounce it in the correct Mongolian way. And that opposition between the really low style and the much higher style is something I played around with in this piece quite a bit. And Jonny was very adept at switching between the two quite fluidly. After the entrance of the soloist, after the entrance of Jonny, the ensemble is essentially just amplifying his natural vocal spectrum. In fact, he's not doing true throat singing as a Mongolian would there, because he's not singing tunes off the harmonic spectrum. In fact, he's just going up and down from the 8th partial to about the 12th or 13th partial, I think, in the harmonic spectrum, and he just does little scales up and down to begin with. and as he goes up and down, the ensemble resonates and sustains those. And also there's some live electronics that I created that also helps sustain that. So it just sort of establishes, it's almost like the exposition, it establishes the main spectral harmonies of the work. As the piece progresses, the harmonics become more and more complex, and they sometimes overlay different harmonic series at once, so they sort of mix them together. For example, he can be doing a harmonic series of F, but the bass instruments are doing a harmonic series on D flat, for example, and some of the upper instruments also mix together some of the higher partials. And so I guess that's almost like a sort of development section in a sense, where the spectra become more and more complex. And then towards the end, it resolves again into the sort of pure harmonic series, of just a single harmonic series in the very final note of the piece, or the very final chord of the piece, which sort of tails off into the distance. And in that particular performance we did in the City Gallery, Jonny, in fact, I worked with Jonny to explore the acoustics of the City Gallery, which are a very resonant space, and he wandered off down the stairs, in fact into a completely other gallery within the building, but you could still hear him floating up the stairwell. So one of the wonderful things about Jonny's deep voice is the kind of intense timbre of it. It's very rich and full of harmonies, and I wondered how to recreate that with the ensemble. And one of the things I did, apart from having a couple of bass instruments such as bass trombone and double bass, is I detuned a lot of the strings to, in some cases quite radically. I think from memory, the bottom string of the cello was tuned down a fifth or something like that, and then the next string up was tuned down a tone, so that the bottom two strings of the cello were in fact an octave F. And then the double bass was also detuned to an F. So a number of the lower strings of viola, cello and double bass all had their lower strings tuned to this big F. So there's a few moments in the work where you just hear this big unison F blasting out on these detuned strings and on the bass trombone, together with Jonny's low F, and that's one of the moments I'm most fond of in the piece. So it's fantastic to be a finalist in the SOUNZ Contemporary Award again. Every time I've been to a couple of the finals, and they're just great affairs. In fact, I often think that the reinterpretations of the Silver Scroll winners and of the Silver Scroll finalists and the SOUNZ Contemporary winner are some of the highlights, musical highlights of the year for me. They're always very imaginative and little gems of musical creativity. And yeah, it's just wonderful to have an evening with your friends and peers in the composing community, regardless of the outcome. It's always a great little event.